Okay, this is now the Visual Tarot Part 6, and today is a screencast. And I'd like to add a bit more to our ongoing project using WriteNote. And so I added, if you look over on the left here, I added 3 more categories or areas. One is called significator, one is called remember this, and one is called suggestions. And I'll explain what I did and why I did it. So if we start with significator, this is kind of an addition to the last video, and it's some notes about significators just to get us started. And so you can find that if you understand something or have an idea or a thought about significators and what they are, or maybe you do a reading for somebody and you pick a card and you get and in the course of the reading you understand something about the significator or what it meant. Maybe at this point you add your idea to remind you in the section called significators, and so over time you build up a database of information about cards that came up and what they actually were pointing to. And that can be a useful reminder for you. And also you'll find that there will be times when you are able to add more or make a connection with some other factor in a reading or on a card. So I wrote down some information here. I'm not going to put it down and reveal it, it's just it's here. So this is called significance, and I've got here choose a card, maybe talk about it with the questioner. And so I'm sort of writing stuff down and thinking about it at the same time to see what I come up with, or for you, what you come up with. So you pick a card, what do you do with it? Do you talk about it? Sometimes you will mention it to the questioner. So if you get the Sun card, maybe you'll point out to the questioner that they have confidence and they're optimistic. But if you get a card like the Three of Swords reversed, that shows them maybe having been hurt or feeling undermined or feeling overwhelmed and that you're not really able to do much, you may decide you're not going to start the reading talking about how difficult things are, because that can just increase the level of difficulty for the questioner. So you pick a card, but sometimes you keep it to yourself, and it gives you, the reader, an idea of what you can talk about or how you should talk about something that comes up. And I think I mentioned last time that if you get the Sun card, you can talk about big plans and big ideas, and the person can move forward with confidence. But if you get the Three of Swords reversed, or the Ten of Swords, or the Eight of Swords, or the Emperor reversed, for instance, then you maybe have to lead up to what it is that you're saying. You can't just tell them the punchline. You've got to set the scene and talk about this and that, and maybe talk around the subject before you get to the point that you want to make. Just because if you start off with a punchline, it's going to be upsetting for the questioner, so they're not going to listen to what you have to say. Or you're going to remind them of something they've been trying to forget. And starting off like that isn't that productive, because, you know, if you think about it for yourself, if you're in a bad mood or feeling unhappy, and somebody reminds you of the reason for your unhappiness, it can be hard. Whereas you can handle the unhappiness, but maybe you have to approach it from a different angle first. So you pick a card and maybe talk about it with the questioner, because this, and I've got here, the card, the significator card, shows something useful and relevant about the questioner's life. And I wrote this down, and I'm thinking, I sometimes like to do this. Instead of that sentence, I break it down into here. So I've got, it shows something useful and relevant, because I want to emphasize the word useful. So I double click it, and then I go up to bold, and then I double click relevant and I go up to bold. So now when I glance at the page, I'm reminding myself the card shows something useful. So we can take what the picture shows and do something with it. It's got a purpose. It's got a reason. It's going to help explain things, for instance. And it's also relevant. So it's important right now. You may find that 2 months from now or even 2 days from now, it's no longer important, but it is at the moment. So it can be why the person's having the reading in the first place. Oh, I hate these pop-up things. Now I have to get rid of it. An update, show, what do I want to say? I'll remind me later. Okay. Then it tells the question of situation, their current thinking, their fears or worries, and maybe it's like a weather report. So if you know it's raining outside, you know you need to take an umbrella or an overcoat. So knowing what the weather's like can cause you to act appropriately. And so when you know what the significator is for the questioner, you know how the questioner can act or what would be appropriate actions on the part or appropriate behavior on the part of the questioner. And so you, the reader, can talk in language that the questioner is going to understand and appreciate and see the sense of and get something out of. Okay, so that's something about significators. And then I wrote down, I wrote down this section called Remember This. And it's a bit like sometimes when it comes to reading cards, it can be important to remember certain things that I didn't know how to phrase this, and I may change it later, but I put down 2 things here. And so one is you don't have to say everything, or you don't say everything about every card every time. So when you turn a card, you talk about the card in relation to the question that was asked, but you don't tell the questioner everything about that particular card. So if you talk about something and later you think, I wish I'd said that, don't bother, because it wasn't the right thing to say. If it had been the right thing to say, you would have thought of it at the time. So I've got a section here, and ideally we'll add to it, about things to remember about doing a reading generally. It can be a rule that is important for you. So maybe you get too involved in the question or too involved in the life of the questioner, and you think, I should back off a bit. So you give yourself a reminder that it's the questioner's question, not mine. And I ought to remember that. And the other thing I wrote here was, don't doubt that you have something to say. Because sometimes if somebody comes to you for a reading, they may, if you say 10 things during the reading, they may remember and work with all 10 things that you say. But they may only remember one of them, and that's important. So I wrote down here, there may be a lot, and I've got Tom Ferry here, because Tom Ferry's a coach. He's a coach for people selling real estate, and he's very interesting and entertaining. And so he's got this thing about making lists, and so you make lists and you work from a list, not from memory. So. And he's got this, there's a video called, I think it's called the $1 Million Checklist or something like that. And he tells real estate people how to plan their day. So you get up early and you get psyched, ready for the work. And then you do an hour of CEO time where you think about and plan and organize your vision for the company or for your business. Your mission, think about what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it. And then you think about the values or the value of what you're giving people who buy real estate from you. You know, you're helping them improve their lives and the whole kind of thing. And then you go into your office and you work through. So he gives you step by step how to set up the day so that you can be productive. And so you may find with a reading that you that you give a whole checklist or a whole step-by-step solution to the questioner. And that's one type of reading, and that's one type of situation. But there can be other times where You talk about this and that, and only one thing sticks, or one thing gets through to the questioner, but that one thing is important. And so I've got here, this is what I spoke about, I think, in the last video, about watching this supposed astrology video. And what I got out of it was, don't start in the middle. You need a starting point. And so I've got here Tom Ferry. One of the values of WriteNote is that you can make links. So I have already set up here, over here in suggestions. So I've got suggestions, because I can find that over time I build up a list of useful solutions for people, or things they can try, or things they can do. So I'm saying here, maybe sometimes I'll talk about Tom Ferry and making lists and living by design and not from memory. And so you set up the day. But then I've got below, a SWOT analysis can be a useful thing to tell people about. So you're with a question, I think it's useful to be able to give something, to be able to tell somebody things that they can actually do, so that they can then go off and work through the solution and have greater success, let's say. And sometimes a SWOT analysis will be useful. SWOT, what are the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats? But let's say we've got Tom Ferry. So what you do is you highlight the words that you want, and then you right click, and down at the bottom here you can make a hyperlink. And so the text is going to be Tom Ferry. The target is going to be you can select a file or a folder, but here I'm going to go, and this is going to give me the topics in this particular file, page, whatever you want to call it. So I know that it's in suggestions. So I'm going to click on OK, and then I'm going to click on OK. So that now that Tom Ferry is a link. So don't doubt you have something to say. Maybe it may be a lot, and then I click on Tom Ferry, and it takes me to this section called suggestions, and then I can add more. So it's a way of navigating back and forth among the different ideas that you've added to your database or to your files. And then if you want to get back easily, F9 gives us this list of where we've been. So if we want to get back to where we were before suggestions, I think it's you go click on remember this, and here we're back at the page. So you can use this list on the right hand side, the history section, the history tab, to go back and forth between different sections. Okay, that's it for today. We looked a bit at significators and what they mean. We looked at remember this, or by all means call it something else. And we looked at suggestions. So we're gradually building up our database, we can say. So that's it for the moment, and I'll talk to you next time. Okay, thanks a lot.